Testing, testing, testing. Okay. Peers, I'm live and ready. Okay. I'll get started in a minute. Alright, let's minimize this. That's the Discord. Oh yeah, I'll post the link in the chat. Where's the chat? Oh, I have to pull it up here. Okay. Alright, so I posted the link in the chat. It's available for you to view if you want to. I don't know why, since I'm going to be showing it on screen anyways. Alright. Hello, welcome to week 3 of Art 102. Alright, so today we'll be talking about elements of art and principles of design, which are foundational aspects of understanding art. Okay, so I will present. As usual, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to post in chat. And I have my phone here so I can see the chat this time. Alrighty. Checking my phone just to make sure it's synced up, and yep, we're all good. Alright, elements of art and principles of design. I'll be defining what those are. But within this slide presentation, there's a couple words that you need to know in order to understand what I'm talking about. So I'll be using the words elements and composition. So elements are parts of the image or whatever that make up the composition. So for example, this lightning bolt, this arrow, the word chonies, the gray background, those are elements, and putting them all together, that makes a composition. So think about it as in ingredients in a soup. So a composition would be the entire soup, and the vegetables, those would be the elements that make up the soup. So, yeah. So 7 elements of art. For the elements of art and principles of design, I did a lot of research from different publications, and most of the elements of art are agreed upon as far as these are concerned. For principles of design, they're way off, but these are the most common I could find, and it's pretty spot on. So let's go by starting off with line. But before we get to line, actually, we're going to talk about dimensions real quick. So a single point in space, that is 0D, as in one dimension, 2 dimension, 3 dimension, stuff like that. A point where you can't move anywhere, where it's just one point, that's 0 dimensions. However, when you form a series of points like this, and then like this, where it gets more dense, a line is basically a bunch of points stuck together in a continuous line. Okay. And 1D is interesting because this is considered one-dimensional. So we're looking at it on a 2-dimensional plane, which is the screen right now. But however, you want to think of it like a light rail or a train, where it can only go forward and reverse, and it can't go left and right. So if we have a line that doesn't close, that's one-dimensional. But But just like we also see 3D objects on the screen, um, we still see them as two-dimensional. So with the screen that we have right here, this slideshow, even myself, since I'm mediated through a webcam instead of in person, you're seeing me as a 2D thing. A thing. I just called myself a thing. So if you have a chance, watch this video about this 1D video game. So although you can see it exists in three-dimensional space, I mean, this is only two-dimensional right here, but you can only go forward or backwards through this. So it's a really cool way of making a video game with only 1D. And because it's one-dimensional, you can only have one color at one point. You don't need to know that much, but yeah, lines are basically one-dimensional. And here's different types of lines. So a gesture line, if you start taking drawing classes, as this is one of the first things you'll learn, is a gesture line is things that are quick. It's more of an impression than a definition, meaning it's not an exact thing. Like if you're capturing a life model, for example, they'll pose for 30 seconds, and you have to just quickly get the outline of their form. Okay, so if this is not an exact thing. Gesture is just quickly gestural. That's the word we use for it. Contour lines. So these roughly define the outline of an element. I just read the slide. That's a major sin. I apologize. But there's no better way to put it. So this isn't a contour line here. This is a picture of a leaf. But the contour line of this is the outline that defines what the leaf is. So even though this is just a line, well, I mean, it's technically a shape, but we'll go over that in a minute. We can tell this is probably it. You can't see my hand. I'm covering the leaf. But if you didn't see the leaf, you could probably tell this is a leaf just because we recognize the shape of it, and the contour lines roughly define what this leaf is. We don't get the details of the veins or the stems or whatever. And then so either you get this or you don't. Okay, I'll explain. So this is referring to Joy Division Unknown Pleasures, the graphic. Depeche Mode is not the band that does this. And Boys Don't Cry is a Cure song. It's purposely incorrect. So this is a famous graphic, I guess you could say, for Joy Division's Unknown Pleasures album. And it outlines an EEG, but it looks like mountains. And so it sort of has this element of like if these were mountains, we could tell these are mountains because we recognize the edges of them, even though those don't really exist in nature. We still need a way to, as humans, to define what the outline is. Otherwise, we'll just get confused. Calligraphic lines. So these are just really fancy lines. There's a lot of fancy writing, but it also includes just the lines like this that aren't part of the writing. And I have an example of calligraphy that my mom did that I had her send me a couple years ago for this class. So yeah, it's just writing technically, but calligraphic writing is more about, has a lot to do with the aesthetics of it, of making it look beautiful and not just information just for its own sake. So yeah. Hi, Mom. Cross hatching. So remember, we're still on lines. So cross hatching is a technique used to make cross lines hatch each other, if that's a word, to create a shading, quote unquote shading. A lot of like this doesn't exist in real life, but the reason someone would use cross hatching instead of like a smooth shading is because you don't have a tool that has that capability. Um, Actually, I think I have an example here. Um, let's see. Yeah, so I have this example of this is one of my daily comics journals. So you can see that they're not cross, but the closer the lines are together, it creates a darker value. We'll go over value soon. But yeah, so and then the lighter areas, there's less lines going through. So if I did diagonal lines or lines that crossed, that would make it even darker. Okay. And these are a couple examples. So left talks specifically about what crosshatching can do. So if you crosshatch the scene, it's a little bit darker, so it makes it a little bit more moodier and gloomy. Whereas if there wasn't these crosshatching, if these walls were just plain white, it would come off as brighter, right? And I have this example on the right because you could do it with color. It's not often you see cross hatching done with color illustrations, but there you go. There's a fun little example. It's a good book, by the way. Phantom lines. Okay, so there's this concept called implied lines. There's two different versions of this, but for simplicity's sake, I'm calling this phantom lines, where, for example, you could tell this is Goku. No, I'm just kidding. I know it's Pikachu. Um, this is Pikachu, right? Even though we don't have the outline of their form, we have this illusion of this triangle. We know there's not an actual triangle there, but there's an illusion of it because our brains are sort of tricked into seeing that based on what's implied with the information around it. Same thing with this letter, the S. There's no actual S. It's just a bunch of lines that are cut off and specific lengths. Okay, so those are phantom lines where the lines don't actually exist. But implied lines are different, and this is a an example of implied lines. Basically, imply motion or direction. So I'm gonna just go to the next slide and see. So we have these implied lines of where the eye takes you, where the artist is putting points of interest, where the artist wants your eye to move from one place to another. So this isn't a very flat composition where everything's even and you want to look everywhere at the same time. There's a lot of lines going like down, this way, etc. So implied lines also don't exist like phantom lines, but they're just directional. Um, and it's just, again, a way for the artist to lead your eye through a composition using elements, which are words you are familiar with. Okay, and there's tons of examples out there. All right, so we're still on lines because there's a lot of them. Horizontal lines, these are perpendicular to the earth, which means rest, which essentially is more relaxed or more stable, because think about it, your body in relation to the earth. So if you're laying down flat, you're relaxed, you're stable, you're flat, you don't have to worry about falling over. So that's the function of strong horizontal lines. But there are instances where there's horizontal lines everywhere, but when they're emphasized like this composition, especially since this has a very long ratio, a landscape composition, there when those are emphasized, that really is trying to communicate rest. So because obviously there's vertical lines too, which we'll talk about on the next slide. They're not all it's not purely horizontal lines, but most of it is, and that's what's emphasized. Whereas vertical lines, this defies gravity, which is a cheesy way to say it, but cheesy's good. And yeah, they communicate height and structure and tallness and assertiveness. Think about you standing as opposed to laying down, and how those differ. And yeah, the way we see art is usually in relation to who we are as humans and how we perceive things as humans, right? So in this composition, you have these characters who could probably be really really tall, but in the scope of the entire composition, they're really really tiny. So we have this canyon, this glacier canyon, that the artist chose to picture a lot of space where that the characters do not take up, to emphasize how tall it is and how strong it is and how intimidating and foreboding it can be, right? Whereas here, this is definitely a more relaxed composition, where you're not like here, you're stuck between these two walls, but here, besides this right here, the traversal from here to here isn't so bad, right? Because it's very flat, more or less. Okay, and then finally we have diagonal lines. This is my own thing that I made in a video game engine, and so diagonal lines are not in between. Actually, they're more active, because think of yourself and your body. If you're leaning diagonally like Michael Jackson, there's a sense of unease. You're about to fall over, and also it sort of calls attention. It breaks the space up of a perfect grid by going diagonal. It just cuts across it. So think of it like that. So yeah, they just don't conform to the rest of the earth, essentially, and so they're kind of often used to be more dramatic. So in a lot of manga, I was trying to animes the show, manga is the comics, right? Anyways, in the comics, the manga, there's a lot of um, frames that are diagonal, and a lot of those times when they have diagonal frames, then that means there's a lot of action going on. Okay, and so yeah, I'm not going to repeat myself. Procedurally generated lines. This is just a bonus one I'm throwing in. They're just lines created through math, algorithms, and stuff. I don't know. I just think they're cool. All right, so that's it for lines. That's just one of the elements. Now we're on to shape. So whereas lines were 1D, shapes are two-dimensional. Okay, they possess height and width. Those are so weird to say. Okay, and a shape is something that is closed. Like, for example, here you could see the line is continuous, so that creates a shape. Whereas if one of these points were missing, it would just be a line. Um, you could still consider it 2D and call it an open shape, but that's just technicalities at this point. Okay, and so there's many different kinds of shapes. There's square, triangle, circle. I'm just kidding. Yeah, so shapes can take all kinds of forms, right? Not just the actual shapes that we know, regular shapes, but also like organic shapes and mixed and zigzag, accidental, whatever. All of these are shapes because they exist in two dimensions, and they're meant to be in two dimensions. As opposed to how I talked about, I'm a 3D human being, but I'm a 2D being in how you're seeing me right now. Okay, unless you're creeping through in my room somehow, then never mind. Yeah, so shapes always have two dimensions, height and width, right? These can't exist as one dimension. You can extrude them to three dimensions, but we're not concerned about that right now. Okay, so this is technically a 3D scene, but it provides a good contrast. So there's this little mini game called Bioforce Utopia where there's all these robots and stuff, and you shoot guns at them, but the guns sprout plants to sort of overtake these man made things. So geometric shapes are, you'll see mostly in man made things. It's very rare in nature that you see right angles, perfect boxes, well, circles are more common, but like perfect triangles. Those don't happen too often in nature. Um, but organic shapes where there's no regular, um, like right here, like sides to it, and they're not perfectly symmetrical, that often is a hallmark of nature, and humans, we try to imitate that in our designs by introducing curves and stuff. Like, for example, my phone is a box, it's a rectangle, right? But we have these curves here because that has a sort of sleekness to it. Um, it's it's kind of a fake way of imitating nature, of not making everything perfectly geometric, because then that feels kind of boring and stale or whatever. So by adding curves to designs, that really could make it more elegant, could make it more ugly, but they communicate different things. So the more perfectly aligned things are to the x and y axes, um, the more geometric, the more formal, the more businesslike. Um, I wouldn't say boring, but sometimes boring. Whereas organic shapes are generally more free flowing and, um, oh, what's the word? Not unpredictable, but, I guess, yeah, less predictable because they're not necessarily regular. Now they can have symmetry. Like this is a good example. It is symmetrical according to if you put a line through it like this. But generally they don't always have to be, and they're usually not. I'm not sure if that's correct. Anyways, we'll move on. Figure ground relationships. So this is based on human perception and figuring out what is the foreground and what's the background. Foreground being the part that you look at, that's the most important, and the ground is what it lays upon. So if you had a painting, the canvas would be the ground, whereas if there was a portrait of someone, the figure would be the person you paint. So this is kind of steps in how it goes. Like easy, you can obviously tell this is a heart. The figure is the heart itself. The ground is just the background. The WWF panda. So these are just a bunch of shapes. It's not an actual panda, but we perceive it as a panda because we're familiar with what a panda looks like, and we know they're black and white. And these blobs tell us like, okay, that's what this is trying to represent. So this is sort of I put medium because, it's easy to understand what it is, but there's a little bit more, um, ambiguity as easy as it is. And then here's an MC Escher, uh, drawing illustration where the figure and ground are, they interchange depending on what you're focusing on at the moment. And yeah, it's there, and because everyone knows MC Escher, where he drew like crazy stairs going all over. He likes to play a lot with perception and figure ground. What's the most important thing? What are you looking at? That's the most important thing. But if you look at something else, that becomes the most important thing. And it really is an interesting psychological way to play with the viewer. Okay, and more shapes just because, I like what Google brings to the shape arena when it comes to the Google Slides. I don't know. Just a fun little composition. All right, forms. So we talked about 1D, 2D. Now this is 3D. All right, so what is a 3D shape? I really like this because it's in Comic Sans. And if you don't know, for designers, Comic Sans, this font is very maligned. It's technically bad design, but it has its purpose, and I definitely defend the use of Comic Sans. So 3D shape has a height, depth, and length, or height, width, and depth. Um, those are so weird to say. So it's usually width, but length is also acceptable as well. And yeah, so it has those 3 dimensions. So each of these is a dimension. The height is a dimension, the length or width is a dimension, and the depth is a dimension. Okay, so 3D shapes have faces, vertices, and edges. Faces, that's basically the flat part, the part where if you threw a brick on the ground, it would land on the face. A vertex is the corner or a point where 2 or more edges meet. Okay, or faces. Both, actually. All right, so you don't need to know the specifics of that. That's just a little bit more information. There's open and closed. What am I talking about? Form. Okay, form. I woke up at 5 o'clock and couldn't go back to sleep till like 6:30. So it's one of those days. All right. So open and close forms. So obviously open means there's an opening in it. You could put things in. Whereas closed means it's sealed off from the outside. And yeah, I could go on a tangent, but I'm not going to. It would take too long. So this is by Mandy Keithley, who also teaches at LBCC. She's a sculptor, and she makes these organic forms. This would be a mostly closed form, except it has this opening right here. So it's an open form. This is a completely closed form by Anish Kapoor. He does a lot of gigantic works. He's the one who did the giant bean, the giant reflective bean that I talked about last week. That's in Chicago, Illinois, USA. And Julia Half-Candel, which is just an artist I saw in the gallery. I love her groupie stuff. That's all I can say. All right, space. Okay. So space is our next subject, and it's the way things relate to each other as well as the canvas. So this is an example of the clip art that comes with Google Slides. So separately, what we have here is a sun, a cloud, water drops, and a line. If we take each of them separately, but when we put them in context of each other, we have a little scene in our head now. Whereas putting a cloud blocking the sun and these water drops, we assume those are coming from the cloud, right? So the space helps us understand how things relate to each other, and it helps us inform us of not only the physical space of what it is, but also what it can represent. Again, so if these raindrops were above the cloud and the sun was below, it wouldn't really make much sense. And then all of this is put on a canvas, and it's given space because these aren't all right on top of each other. They're positioned specifically on a page in order to create this composition. Okay, positive, negative space. So this is my space wolf husband, Amicus. Say hello to him. I'll probably talk about him more. Long story. But so positive, negative space is a way of Yeah, I guess it's pretty much like figure ground relationship. So the positive space would be this wolf leaning against the tree, and the negative space would be uh, this area around him. And so the negative area, the negative space, I should say, that's not as emphasized. It's less important. It's called negative space. In design terms, it's called white space, whether it's white or not. And the positive space is what we're meant to focus on most of the time. Not every composition has positive and negative space like this. For example, um, this boar on the left. So, in my opinion, because you can argue about it, this would be the positive space, him standing in front of this cornfield or wheat field. Sorry. This would be the negative space to me because it's just more background and it provides a grounding, like an element to put this boar in, right? And this one's a little bit more tricky because we have this this second gator. To me, this would be the um, oh gosh, what am I talking about? Positive space, because this is what we're focused on. Everything around it is kind of decoration. The reason I have this one is because some people might consider this gator to still be positive space. I would consider it to be negative space. I'd consider it more of decoration. So these show examples of positive, negative space not always having to be perfect, like this one. Oh, what a cutie. Okay. Um, all right, so perspective. This one's a little bit more tricky because even I get a little bit confused sometimes unless there's like diagrams like this. Okay, so we're okay. So what time's okay? I need to go faster. So again, we're looking at things in 2D, but perspective is imitating a 3D space to give us a sense of how objects relate to each other. Okay, so um, right here we have the horizon. So everyone knows what a horizon is. It's where the sky meets the ground visually, according to your perception. The vanishing point is when you're, the easiest example is looking at a road where it seems to just disappear. That's a vanishing point. And in perspective, the orthogonal lines lead from the corner of an object to that vanishing point. So these are orthogonal lines. 1 point perspective mean there's one main vanishing point. 2 point perspective mean there's two main vanishing points. I'm just gonna go over this really quickly because honestly, this doesn't really come into play too much unless you're actually drawing a composition, which you might, but it can be kind of confusing. And 3 point perspective, three main vanishing points, etc. And then here, and then 4 to 6 point perspectives exist. I don't think there's more. I mean, if you go into higher dimensions than we can perceive, then yeah, there are. But I think as far as humans can see, there's up to 6 point perspectives. And it gets really, really weird. It's cool stuff, though. Okay, so again, and then I would say just watch this video. It makes more sense. Okay. All right, so atmospheric perspective, it's a lovely sense of perspective. This is from the game Firewatch. I thought I was about to sneeze. So atmospheric perspective creates the illusion of space by things in the distance. You can tell they're in the distance because of the way light reflects off of particles. So unless you have something like a day that's 100% clear of pollution of air particles, which is impossible, When you see a giant space, especially in a big city, and you're looking down like a big avenue, you'll see that the building, the further the building is, the more or the lighter or the fuzzier they are. So atmospheric perspective is how um, light plays with these things and bounces off particles, and how particles in the air block light from shining through perfectly. So yeah, I'm just gonna stop there because like it could get a little bit complicated. I will show this real quick because it's 22 seconds. This is a pretty cool video. All right. Um, yeah, that's how you can play with perspective. All right, texture. So there's two types of textures that we talk about. First one is actual textures, which mean you can physically feel it. Like this, it, for me, I can feel my shirt. It's made of cotton, right? But for you, you can't. It's implied. And so implied texture means texture that isn't actually real. It's just drawn. It's two dimensional. So this is technically um, implied texture to me because it's a photograph of something, and I can't touch it. But on the right, this is like a grassy texture that's from the game Quake. If you know Magic Eye, this is like a Magic Eye image that I made, which it's pretty easy to do. So actually, it's not. It's a little complicated. Never mind. But yeah, so that's implied because it's supposed in the video game it's supposed to imitate grass and look like grass, um, but it's not. So color is a very complicated thing that we're gonna talk. I'm not done with lecture, but we're gonna talk about next week. Okay, so I'm gonna talk a little bit about the scientific parts of it next week as well. But hue is what we think about when we talk about color. If something's green, green is the hue of it. Saturation is how much of the color there is. So if it's super, super light green where it looks white almost, that has low saturation. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But we'll be talking about value. So value is different because that is the lightness or darkness of something. Um, I totally forgot I had this slide. Um, I mean, it's kind of weird to laugh at my own joke, but I don't care. So value is the lightness or darkness of an object. So if you're able to see this magic eye here, this is the image you would see. Um, so in this image, it's a depth map, which is different. But when we see things that are lighter, we think of like actual light, and when things are darker, we think of shadow. And it's also symbolic as well. Like lighter things are more pure, darker things are more evil, etc. Um, but yeah, that's value, whether the lightness or darkness of something. Here's a fox. If you're in my class, this will be on the quiz, but it's otherwise not relevant. Yeah, just look at this fox for a few seconds. Okay, I only have 20 minutes. All right, so these are the most popular principles of design. So again, I did a lot of research on this, and there's a lot of not disagreements, but it was very inconsistent to find the principles of design. Again, when I talked about this in the first week. I don't have a book because um, I don't I don't want to get all these definitions from one source because there's bias there. So I try to gather them from as many different sources as I can. And so these are 2, 3, 4. These are 8 principles that I sort of group together. Some of them kind of bleed into each other. Okay. All right. So, so the elements are elements that make up of a composition. They're things that exist, whereas the principles of design, these are more guidelines on the actual composition itself. Okay. So balance, and the way I put the definitions, they're examples of this. So balance refers to the distribution of visual elements in the composition. So there's symmetry and asymmetry. This one is asymmetrical because all the words are on the left quarter of the slide. All right, so here's 2 different kinds of symmetry. So this is symmetrical on the left. This is, I don't know how to pronounce his name, but this is an artwork where the symmetry exists like here. I believe that's called vertical symmetry, or it's vertical symmetry. All right, so it's vertical because the left side is pretty much mirrored on the right side. But horizontally, it's not, because this brick red-ish color should also be here, and this cloth would also be up here. So the symmetry only exists from left to right. There's many different types of symmetry, but like radial symmetry and stuff. But we're not too concerned about that right now. Maybe I'll talk about it later. Anyways, so one thing I want to emphasize with this image is that something doesn't have to be 100% perfectly symmetrical in order to be considered symmetrical. Okay, so because there's this little opening in the clouds here that doesn't exist here, and that's fine. It doesn't have to be perfectly symmetrical in order for it to be considered symmetrical. And also here, this is symmetry in content, and what I mean by this is they're 2 big beefy dads, essentially, like on both sides of the composition. They're wearing different things, they're different species of animals, but they have roughly the same mass and weight. So there's symmetry there in content, where the 2 things that are different, or 2 elements that exist, have the same sort of weight to them. In this sense, literally. So they have equal amount of like symbolic power, I guess. I mean, but there's also asymmetry in their moods. Like this guy's more outgoing, and this guy's more shy. So, and this is, I didn't indicate that this is asymmetry. So this is asymmetrical. This is an interesting example because the character here is placed in the middle, which is usually tends to be symmetrical. However, they're facing towards their right, the left side of the composition. I'm going to do it from my view. They're facing to the left, so their beak is on the left. Their halberd is in their right hand, and it's facing to the left. And there's more on the left side up here, and there's more on the bottom side over here on the right. I get confused between directions sometimes. So although there's like symmetry in like the armor and stuff, the fact that the character is looking one way breaks that symmetry. Okay, because everything's sort of leading your eye to the right. Another good indicator of this is where the character is looking. That's we sort of want to look at this at what the character is looking at. So we tend to move our eyes according to where a character is looking. And then in content, here's asymmetry. So this is interesting because there's perspective here. So obviously this person's is a lot smaller here than this person, but we can gather by the fact that they're standing on a dragon that they're probably a similar size. But the emphasis here is asymmetry in content. So I'd honestly much rather be the person with a dragon on my side rather than the person without the dragon. So there's a contrast between these two characters, right? Because one has a really giant creature to help. Okay. All right. So contrast. So the contrast is pretty much with the rest of the points. Oh, I need to go a lot faster. Yeah, it's a way in which elements are distinct from each other. Like this, for example. So there's contrast between these two animals. They're both really cute, obviously, but one's soft and furry and brown, and the other one is scaly and I guess bluish, grayish, greenish. I don't know what color that I would call that. But it's interesting because God, I need to stop saying the word interesting. So it's cool because there are a lot different creatures. One you think of as soft and cuddly, the other you think of as scary. And when you put them together and they're next to each other, it's sort of surprising, right? You don't expect crocodiles and kitties to get along. And here's one that's more about content. So there's this game called Jeff where you play this weird space alien creature. And in this scene, you're having these billionaires build IKEA furniture for you. So they're the bad guys. The billionaires are, obviously. There's not such thing as a good billionaire. And then here's this weird alien creature directing these billionaires to to assemble IKEA furniture. And here's a link to the game. So emphasis or emphasis. I forgot what movie I'm quoting. But emphasis is a way usually one element stands out from the rest. And this isn't exactly in every composition. It's actually kind of hard to find really good examples. So so what's the emphasis here? And when something is emphasized, it's basically the first thing you will notice in a painting or composition, rather. So the emphasis for me, is this area right here, because that's where the brightest part of the image is. Okay, and then we're drawn to here second. So to me, the emphasis is all of this. And then this is less important because it's in shadow. It's a little bit more muddy, whereas this just kind of shines brightly at you. And we have this cute little mouse. So this emphasis is obviously on the tiger, the very real tiger, office worker, accountant. The emphasis is here because he's placed directly in the center. There's this black around him that's framing him. And he's lighter than the rest of the black, right? So what about this carpet in the back? It's also lighter. Well, the thing is, it's in the background. It's covered. We're not shown all of the carpet, whereas this element is placed front and center, right? That's what we're supposed to look at. We're not supposed to look at the carpet. Okay. And this is one of those figure ground things where's the emphasis here for you? So close your eyes real quick and open them and see what your eyes go to first. Okay, so for me, it was actually this shadow here. This is from the game Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. So, yeah, so right here, the reason Senua is emphasized to me is because this is bright here, but this is also a very, very, very strong shape. But it would also be valid to say this is the emphasis for you, because you're just drawn to that brightness. And in the game, part of your goal is to get to this. So this is in this screenshot, that's not necessarily the emphasis, but when you play the game and you walk along these shores, the emphasis is there because you could see like that's the most important prominent thing there. So again, emphasis is different for different people. Scale and proportion. All right, so scale and proportion is how things relate to each other. So in this image, who are the who's the adult and who's the kid or kids, right? So this is from a show called Bluey, which is an Australian kids TV show. I know that because of furry culture, basically. But yeah, so we know that this is probably the dad. Oh, what's his name? I can't remember his name. This is Bluey. I forgot her name. But we can tell this is the parent because he's bigger, and kids are usually smaller than parents, up up to a certain standard. I'm definitely taller than both of my parents, or up until a certain time period. Also, here's this cute little couple. So, what are we talking about? Scale and proportion. Okay, so here's this chunky, muscly dude with an axe. Because he has this very determined look, he's bigger. He's carrying this axe, battle axe. We can tell he's probably like the strong adventurer, the brawny one. And then this little cutie here, he's looks a little bit more nimble. He's playing an instrument, which signifies more intellect, based on stereotypes, of course. And so we have this contrast between these two characters, right? And then this is my favorite one. So scale is important here because so sharks don't have legs, obviously, but they do here. So we start off with with this shark, and it has a normal amount of leg for a cartoon shark. But what if we add more leg? Then it becomes a little bit weirder. We add more leg, then it's unsettling. Then we have a lot more leg, and then this happens, and then we have a very scary amount of leg. Yeah, that completely changes things, such as this bear. um, yeah, yeah. This person says they really don't like the legs. They're really creepy. Um, if you have a bear with like smaller legs is fine, but having really long legs is very bizarre. Um, so hierarchy is an arrangement of elements according to important significance. So I already have hierarchy in this slide, meaning hierarchy is the most important thing. Um, Hierarchy is another way to say ranking things if you're not familiar with that word. Hierarchy is the arrangement of elements. So that's the second most important thing because it's slightly bigger than this third line. So this is the most important thing you need to know, hierarchy. And then this provides additional information that's not as important but still important. And then this third one is a qualifier. So it's not as important as these first two lines, but it's still relatively important. And the reason it's still relatively important is because it's not super tiny. It's almost the same size as that. So there's a hierarchy here, obviously. So there's only two things or two characters in here. So obviously the professor instructor bear. I'm a professor otter, so it's not quite me. I wish it was me though. That would be awesome. I want the ability to do that. So the hierarchy here is obviously the bear professor because he's in the middle. He's standing up, whereas this student right here, they're sitting down. They're looking down, and you can tell there's a difference in status there because they're in front of the classroom, and we're familiar with how schools operate, right? So hierarchy is also not just a visual thing, but it's also based on content as well. And hierarchy is really important in website design. So what's the first thing you saw here when I skipped to the or when I switched to this page? For me, it was the word binder. So binder to me is what this website reads to me. That's the most important thing. So I know, okay, this is binder. And then what do I go to next? So to me, it's this right here because it has these two different colors here, and that seems to pop out more. Okay. And this, I don't know. I think they're interchangeable. What's more important? But because I go from here to here, I'll probably go to here next. There's a lot more contrast between the black and the background than there is with this blue and the background. But hierarchy is a very important way to communicate with websites. And I saw this quote last year saying that was pretty depressing, saying the best minds of our generation are being trained on how to get people to look and click at things best. Which is kind of sad. Like, instead of doing something like super awesome, like Google and other tech companies hire extremely smart people to get people to look at stuff and click on stuff and get views. And it's ridiculous. And so this is what it says here. Right here, interesting use of non-hierarchy. So this is a very interesting website because all of these things are given equal weight. So you're not directed towards one necessarily, unless you take the approach of reading, like, I guess, like a normal human being, from top left to right, and then down left to right. When I say normal human being, I just realize, yeah, not all humans read from left to right. There's also Japanese, Arabic, Farsi. I think Farsi is from right to left, and then up and down. Yeah, so my mistake. I apologize for that. Unity and variety. So unity is how a bunch of elements are similar to each other, and variety is how they're different. Okay, like this, for example, same font, and then, or same font, same size. This one is same font, but different sizes. So this is Unity. These are all horseshoe crabs. They're in different positions, but they're the same creature. They have different colorings, but they follow the same general color scheme. Like this has pink and blue, and this has pink with blue, and this is blue with pink. Even though there's a little bit of hierarchy, there's still a lot of unity here because a lot of the elements, like such as shape, color, form, they're pretty similar to each other, and they make up the entire composition. And then variety is how things are different. So all these different moles all appear differently, right? And so there's a variety in this composition because they all have different forms, colors, shapes, probably sounds, etc. It's really cute. So there's both unity and variety in this image. So this is a game where this says vinyl cladding. This says tin roof. So there's variety because there's a bunch of different things going on, but within this tin roof, instead of having graphics there, it's words, and it's the same word repeated to indicate what it is. Okay. Pattern and repetition. So it's the way things repeat within the composition. So there's a lot of pattern and repetition within this element here, but it also exists here as well, because it's over here. And same with the mountains, actually. This is different. This stands out, but this is emphasized here. This is where I is drawn, and the windows are basically the same throughout. There's a little bit of difference here and there, but there's a lot of repetition going on. This is a screenshot from a puzzle game where this is all you're given and you have to click. Repetition of the same shape over and over. Rhythm and movement. So movement is implied in a still image because we obviously, if it's a still image, there's not going to be any movement. So movement are lines or the way things are arranged that makes it feel that there's some motion going on. So rhythm is sort of a subset of movement. that makes you sort of follow a line going through. So this has, I forget the words, movement and rhythm. So this has movement because at least to me it feels like these things are moving to the right. There's some rhythm to it. So this one feels like maybe it's going faster because these are so close to each other. And then there's this rhythm here, that sort of indicates it's a little bit slower. And yeah, we're familiar with light trails and vapor trails and smoke trails, and these seem to be forms of that. Obviously, they're just circles. There's no movement here, but that seems to be what might be going on. And then here's an optical illusion by Akiyoshi Kidaoka. I shouldn't have tried to pronounce that. These are just lines and squares, but they're composed in a way where it seems like there's motion going on. It looks like they're bending, and there's a rhythm to it where it goes kind of like it's dancing. So I'm gonna move on because that's yeah. And so that's pretty much it. These are just alien creatures I just couldn't help but put in. But yeah, that's as far as I have to talk about elements and principles. Unfortunately, I couldn't, or I was going kind of slow at first and kind of rushed the latter bit because I wanted to make sure this was only an hour. So yeah, let me go to me. Just me. Look, I'm big. So I was gonna show my. I actually might as well show her here. So this is Dr. Baby. I just want to show her real quick. The reason she looks weird right now is because there's a green screen behind me. It's actually a green screen that's turned black, but I'm not gonna try to take. I was gonna try to take her out, but oh well. I have another mantis, but oh, there she is. There she is. Oh, I can't really see her. There's Dr. Baby. Oh, she jumped onto the screen. Okay. All right, that's it. Yeah, the other mantis, she doesn't like to be handled. So, thanks for watching. Hope this was informative. I hope you get a look at a flower today or something. All right, thanks. Love you. Toodles. Bye-bye.